What would you do if the beggar you mercilessly despised and humiliated yesterday were actually the absolute master of your destiny tomorrow? Alejandro de Velasco had more gold in his coffers than the weight of his own sins. But on that stormy night in 1890, he arrived at the gates of the Las Flores estate, covered in mud, shivering, and pretending to be a sewer rat. He was looking for a truth that money couldn't buy, a heart that wouldn't sell itself to the highest bidder. While everyone spat on him and slammed doors in his face, a hand reached out in the darkness with a piece of stale bread and a threadbare blanket. She did not know that, with that gesture, she was feeding the man who could destroy her world or save her soul forever. This is the story of a white lie that revealed the purest love and how simplicity defeated greed. Rain lashed against the windows of the main mansion of the Las Flores estate, as if the sky itself were weeping for the moral decay that inhabited those stone walls. Outside, the wind howled with the ferocity of a hungry wolf. Inside, the warmth of the fireplace and the clinking of crystal glasses tried to hide an undeniable reality. The Alarcon family was in ruins, even though they refused to admit it. Don Anselmo Alarcon, the patriarch with a gray mustache and a stern gaze, paced back and forth across the main hall, adjusting a velvet vest that had seen better days. His two eldest daughters, Isabella and Camilla, were the living portrait of desperate vanity. Isabella, wearing an excessively tight crimson silk dress, looked at herself in the gilded mirror and pinched her cheeks to give them color. "Father, are you sure the Duke of Montalvo will take this route?" asked Camilla, fanning herself impatiently, even though the room was cold. "We've been waiting for hours and my curls are starting to fall apart in this awful humidity." "Silence!" bellowed Don Anselmo. "My informants assure me that the Duke is traveling incognito through the region looking for land. If we can get him to stay here tonight, one of you two must seduce him. We need that fortune. I don't care what you have to do. Smile until your jaws ache." In a dark corner of the room, almost blending in with the worn velvet curtains, stood Elena. Unlike her sisters, she wore no silk or jewelry. She wore a simple gray cotton dress, clean but patched at the elbows, and her brown hair was pulled back into a practical braid that fell down her back. Elena did not participate in the conversation. She was busy picking up the cake crumbs that Camilla had dropped on the floor, more like an invisible servant than the youngest daughter of the house. Elena was the simplest, the one who had no ambitions for greatness, the one who found comfort in the old books in the library and in tending the garden that her sisters ignored. Suddenly, a sharp, heavy knock echoed on the solid oak front door. Don Anselmo's eyes gleamed with greed. "It must be him. Quick, get into position," he ordered, smoothing his hair. "Elena, hide in the kitchen. I don't want your god-awful appearance to scare off our visitor." Elena lowered her head, accustomed to contempt, and retreated into the shadows of the hallway, though she remained close enough to observe. The butler opened the door and a gust of wind and rain invaded the hall, extinguishing two of the candles on the chandelier. But it was not a duke dressed in ermine and gold who entered. Crossing the threshold was a tall, stooped figure, wrapped in a woolen cloak so dirty it looked like solid mud. The man removed his hood, revealing a face marked by fatigue, with 3 days' stubble and dark eyes that scanned the room with an unsettling intensity. His boots left puddles of dirty water on the Persian rugs. "Good evening," said the stranger in a hoarse but firm voice. "Forgive the intrusion at this ungodly hour. My horse has injured its leg 2 leagues from here, and the storm prevents me from continuing on foot. I am seeking shelter and, if possible, some work in exchange for food. I am Alejandro, a distant cousin of this southern branch of the family, although fortune turned its back on me long ago." The silence in the room was deafening. Isabella's rehearsed smile turned into a grimace of utter disgust. Camilla took a step back, covering her nose with a perfumed handkerchief, as if the man were emanating a deadly plague. Don Anselmo, who had expected to welcome a wealthy nobleman, advanced menacingly, red with rage. "Cousin," he spat the word with venom, "I have no beggar cousins. And if I did, I wouldn't let them in the front door to dirty my carpets. How dare you show up here looking like a swineherd and begging for alms?" "I'm only asking for a dry corner, Uncle Anselmo," Alejandro replied calmly, although his fists clenched under his wet cloak. "I've lost everything in gambling and bad investments. All I have left are my hands to work with." We'll use them to get out of here, Isabella screamed. Father, get this vagrant out of here before he steals our silverware. He smells like a barn. Elena, from her hiding place, felt a twinge in her heart when she saw the humiliation reflected in the man's shoulders. But she also saw something else, a strange dignity. He was not begging desperately, but waiting, watching and judging in silence. She could not bear her family's cruelty. She stepped out of the shadows and spoke in a soft but firm voice. Father, the storm outside is terrible. The river could overflow. We cannot let a relative, however distant, die of cold. That is not Christian. Everyone turned to her. Alejandro looked up, and his eyes met Elena's. For a second, time seemed to stand still. He saw a young woman without adornments or makeup, her hands reddened from work, but with a clear and compassionate gaze that shone brighter than her sister's fake diamonds. "Shut up, you useless fool," shouted Don Anselmo. "No one gave you permission to speak, but on second thought, we may need someone to clean the stables tomorrow, since the stable boy has left," said the patriarch with supreme disdain, looking at Alejandro. "Very well, cousin. You can stay tonight, but not under this roof. You will sleep in the barn with the animals, which is where you seem to belong. Tomorrow you will work to pay for the air you breathe on my land. Now get out of my sight." Alejandro bowed his head slightly, hiding an ironic and dangerous smile. "Thank you, Don Anselmo. Straw is a sufficient bed for a man who has nothing or appears to have nothing." As the man made his way to the back exit, pushed by the servants, Elena felt the need to act. Her family returned to their frivolities, laughing at their poor relative and lamenting that the Duke had not arrived. Dear viewers, before continuing with this crucial moment, I need you to pause for a second. Write in the comments from which city or country you are watching this story. I want to know how far the support for our beloved Elena reaches on this night of injustice. I'll read your comments. The night wore on, and the mansion fell silent. However, it was very cold in the barn. Alejandro had settled down on a pile of dry hay without taking off his wet boots. He looked at the wooden beams of the ceiling and thought of his own mansion, 100 times larger than this one, and of the silk sheets that did not keep him warm because they were empty of affection. He had come to see if selfless kindness existed, and the Alarcon family had failed the test miserably. He was ready to leave at dawn and cross them off his list. Suddenly, the barn door creaked. Alejandro tensed, instinctively reaching for the dagger he hid under his clothes. A dagger with a ruby hilt worth more than the entire estate. However, he relaxed his grip when he saw who was entering. It was her, the girl in the gray dress. Elena entered stealthily, shielding the flame of a candlestick with her hand. She carried a thick woolen blanket under one arm and a steaming plate covered with a cloth in the other hand. "Mr. Alejandro," she whispered, approaching cautiously so as not to scare the horses. She knew they would not have given him dinner. He sat up, fascinated. In the candlelight, Elena's simplicity took on an ethereal beauty. "There is no artifice in you, is there? Won't they punish you if they find you here feeding the beggar?" he asked, his voice losing its feigned harshness and becoming deep and manly. "Probably," she admitted with a wan half-smile as she set the plate on a wooden box. "But hunger hurts more than my father's screams. I brought beef stew and warm bread, and this blanket was my mother's. It's old, but it keeps you very warm." Alejandro took the plate. He did not eat with the voracity of an animal, as one might expect from a vagrant, but with the restrained elegance of someone who had been educated at the table of kings. He paused and stared at her. "Why are you doing this? Your sisters say I'm a disgrace. Your father has treated me like a dog. Why are you putting yourself at risk?" Elena sat down on a bale of straw in front of him and hugged her knees. "Because poverty is not a sin, sir. Sin is cruelty. You said you lost your fortune. I believe that sometimes losing your gold is the only way to know who your true friends are." Her words struck Alejandro in the chest like a sledgehammer. It was exactly how he felt. That was the reason for his absurd disguise. "You are very wise for someone so young." "What is your name?" he asked, feeling an immense desire to kiss her hand, a gesture he suppressed so as not to give himself away. "Elena, just Elena. Tell me, Elena, if you had one wish, if a fairy godmother or a rich duke appeared, what would you ask for? Dresses like your sisters? Jewels?" Elena laughed softly. a sound that warmed the cold air in the barn. Oh no, dresses are tight and jewels are heavy. I would ask for freedom. I would ask for a small house with lots of books, where no one would yell at me for being who I am, and maybe someone who would really look at me without seeing through me as if I were made of glass. Alejandro set his plate aside. For the first time in 5 years, since his wife's death, he felt his heart, which he thought was petrified, beating strongly. There, amid the smell of straw and rain, in front of a woman dressed in gray, the richest man in the region felt unworthy. Sometimes, Elena, he said, leaning toward her. Desires are fulfilled in the strangest ways, he said, leaning toward her. Sometimes princes don't wear crowns, but mud-covered capes. She looked at him, surprised by the tone of his voice. So confident, so powerful, so different from that of the defeated cousin who had walked through the door. There was an electrically charged silence. He reached out and with infinite delicacy brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. His fingers brushed Elena's skin, and she shivered, not from the cold, but from a sudden warmth that ran down her spine. I must leave before dawn, she whispered, breaking the spell, frightened by the intensity of his gaze. Please eat. Tomorrow my father will be hard on you. He will try to break your spirit with hard work. Let him try, Alexander replied with a wolfish smile that she couldn't quite interpret. I'm tougher than I look. Thank you, Elena. I'll never forget this night. She got up, picked up the candlestick, and headed for the exit. Before closing the door, she turned one last time. The golden light outlined her simple silhouette. Good night, cousin Alejandro. God bless you. When the door closed, Alejandro de Velasco stood up. He brushed the dust off his cloak, but there was no longer any weariness in his posture. He stood up as tall as he was, with the authority of a duke. He took a small leather bag full of gold coins out of his boot, weighed it in his hand, and then put it back. No, Elena, he whispered into the darkness with a solemn promise. God has already blessed me by finding you, and I swear by the memory of my ancestors that every tear you have shed in this house will be repaid with diamonds, and every insult you have received will be returned with justice. Tomorrow the game begins, dear Alarcon family, and you are going to lose everything. Meanwhile, in the house, Don Anselmo snored, dreaming of riches, unaware that he had just sent the only man who could save him to sleep with the pigs, and that his despised daughter had just won the lion's heart. But fate is capricious. The next morning, a black carriage bearing the royal coat of arms stopped in front of the estate, bringing news that would change the rules of the game forever and test Alejandro's silent promise. Elena was about to discover that kindness comes at a price and that, sometimes, that price is danger. Dawn at the Las Flores estate did not bring hope, but the rhythmic, brutal sound of steel against wood. The sun was just rising over the hills, tinging the sky with a pale violet color. Alejandro de Velasco had already been working for 2 hours when the sun rose over the hills, tinging the sky with a pale violet color. Don Anselmo had not lied. His intention was to squeeze every last drop of energy out of his poor cousin. Alejandro, stripped of his cloak and dressed only in a coarse linen shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, swung his axe at the oak logs with controlled violence. Each blow was a release. Clack, clack, clack. With each impact, he imagined he was breaking the chains of hypocrisy that bound the high society to which he belonged. His body, sculpted by years of fencing and horseback riding training, was not that of a starving beggar. The muscles in his back tensed visibly under the sweat-drenched fabric. From the second-floor balcony, Isabella and Camilla watched the scene while eating breakfast. Look how he's sweating, Isabella teased, nibbling on toast with jam. He's like a beast of burden. I can't believe he shares our blood. It's disgusting. At least he's good for something, Camilla laughed, adjusting a silk bow in her hair. Dad says that if he works like this for a month, we'll save the wages of 3 laborers. Imagine a relative who's cheaper than a mule. Alejandro listened to them. His senses were sharp, and the breeze carried their shrill voices to the courtyard. He clenched his jaw but didn't look up. They weren't his target. His eyes discreetly searched for another figure, and they found it. Elena was crossing the courtyard with a heavy basket of laundry to wash in the river. She walked with Heir head down, trying to go unnoticed, but he noticed that she paused for a moment when she saw him. She didn't look at him with disgust or mockery, but with concern. Mid-morning, when the sun was beating down and the heat was becoming stifling, Alejandro stopped to wipe his forehead. Suddenly, a cool shadow covered him. It was Elena, holding out a clay bowl with fresh water and a piece of cheese wrapped in a clean cloth. "Please drink," she whispered, glancing nervously toward the house to make sure no one was watching them. "My father will work you to death if you let him." Alejandro took the bowl, his fingers deliberately brushing hers. Elena's skin was soft despite the hard work. "Thank you, Elena, but don't worry about me. I've survived storms worse than your father's bad temper." "It's not just the work," she said, and for the first time she looked up to meet his eyes. She had deep, transparent, honey-colored eyes. "It's the humiliation. No one deserves to be treated as if they were worthless. You have a nobility in your gaze, Alejandro, that doesn't match your clothes." He smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his face, dirty with soot and dirt. "And you have the elegance of a queen, and they treat you like a mop. Why do you allow it?" Elena sighed, a sad sound that seemed to stir the leaves of the nearby trees. "Because they are my family and I have nowhere else to go. My mother died when I was a child and taught me that patience is the greatest virtue. I just hope—" She paused, blushing. "What do I hope for?" he insisted, taking a step closer. The tension between them was palpable, like an invisible thread vibrating in the air. "I hope to find a place where I can be myself. I have a secret garden behind the old stables. It's the only place where roses bloom in this arid land. There I read, there I dream." "Take me there," he asked, almost like an order, but with a gentleness that disarmed her. That afternoon, taking advantage of the fact that Donna Anselmo and the sisters were taking a nap, Elena led Alejandro to her refuge. It was a forgotten corner of the estate, hidden behind ivy-covered stone walls. Inside, it was a miniature paradise. Wild roses, lavender, and jasmine grew in chaotic beauty, tended by Elena's loving hands. They sat on a worn stone bench. Alejandro the Duke, accustomed to the gardens of Versailles and the palaces of Vienna, considered that little garden more beautiful than anything he had ever seen before, because it had soul. "What are you reading?" and he asked, pointing to an old book resting on the bench. "Poetry," she replied. "Lordran talks about passions and freedom. My sisters say that reading dries women's brains, but I think it expands them." Alejandro listened to her talk for an hour. She talked about the stars, how tree roots intertwine underground like secret lovers, and her desire to see the sea one day. She didn't mention dresses, dances, or noble titles. In her simplicity, Elena was infinitely more complex than any woman at court. "Elena," he said, interrupting her gently, "if I told you that I am a man marked by destiny, that I bring problems, would you leave?" "We all bring problems, Alejandro. The question is whether we are willing to share them." It was then that Alejandro decided to move on into the second phase of his plan, the trial by fire. He needed to be absolutely sure. His heart was already screaming that she was the one, but his cynical mind, wounded by the past, demanded one last confirmation. That night, during dinner, Alejandro burst into the main dining room. He had rubbed his eyes to make them red and adopted the posture of a defeated man. "Uncle Anselmo," he exclaimed, dramatically falling to his knees at the entrance. The family stopped eating. Isabella snorted in annoyance. "What is it now? Have you broken the axe?" asked Don Anselmo with disdain. "It's worse, much worse," said Alejandro, his voice breaking. "They've found me. I have a gambling debt. 5,000 reais. If I don't pay before the next full moon, they'll come for me. They'll take me to prison in the capital, or maybe kill me. For the blood that binds us, I beg you, help me." The silence that followed was thick and cold. Isabella and Camilla looked at each other and burst into cruel laughter. 5,000 reales, Camilla scoffed. "You wouldn't be worth that much even if you sold your organs. Why should we give you that money?" "It's a fortune," bellowed Don Anselmo. "Get out of my sight. If you have debts, pay them with your skin. You won't see a penny from my pocket to save a vicious gambler. Get out!" Alejandro feigned submission and shuffled away. The cruelty he expected was necessary for the contrast. He returned to the barn and sat in the darkness, waiting. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Alejandro began to fear that he had misjudged her. Perhaps the money was too much to ask, even for Elena's kindness. But then the door opened. Elena rushed in, her face bathed in tears and pale with anguish. She carried a small wooden box in her hands and knelt in front of him, not caring that her dress was getting dirty on the barn floor. "Alejandro, I heard what they said," she whispered urgently. "I can't let them take you to prison. I can't let them kill you." She opened the box with trembling hands. Inside were a few copper and silver coins, the savings of a lifetime of hardship. But resting on top of the coins was a shiny object, an antique gold medallion with a small ruby in the center. "Take this," she said, placing the box in his hands. "It's not 5,000 reals, I know, but this medallion belonged to my mother. It's the only thing of value I have in this world. It's pure gold. If you sell it in the city, they'll give you enough to flee far away where they can't find you." Alejandro was paralyzed. He looked at the medallion and then into her eyes. She was giving him her past, her only treasure and her security, to save a man she had known for only 24 hours. Elena, her real voice, the voice of the Duke, emerged for a moment, filled with uncontrollable emotion. "This locket is your mother. You can't give it to me. A piece of jewelry has no life. Alejandro, you do. I'd rather lose the memory of my mother than know that a good man has died for lack of help. Please take it and leave right now. Run away." Alejandro closed his hand around the medallion, but not to accept it, but to feel the warmth of her sacrifice. At that moment, the disguise fell completely away from his soul. He no longer had any doubts. She was the woman he had been searching for all his life. He wanted to confess everything to her right there, that he could buy the entire estate with the money in his pocket, that she would be a duchess, that she would never again have to wash clothes or suffer contempt. But before he could utter a word, a commotion from outside shook the night. Dogs barking, horses neighing, and screams. "Open up, in the name of the law!" shouted a powerful voice from the main courtyard. Elena jumped to her feet, terrified. "They've come for you," she exclaimed. "Quick, hide in the haystack. I'll distract them." But Alejandro knew they weren't coming for him. His debts were a lie. This was real, something that wasn't in his plans. They both left the barn and ran toward the main house. In the courtyard, lit by torches, stood a luxurious matte black carriage that looked sinister. A man was getting out of it. He was not a law enforcement officer, but Don Fausto de la Vega, an elderly merchant from the region known for his immense wealth and depraved reputation. He was 60 years old, with a prominent belly and watery eyes that undressed women with a glance. Don Anselmo stood at the door, trembling and pale as a ghost. "Don Fausto, I wasn't expecting you until next week," Elena's father stammered. "My promissory notes are due today, Anselmo," said the merchant in an oily, unpleasant voice. "You owe me 50,000 reales, and I know you don't have it. I've come to seize the Las Flores estate. Tomorrow you and your daughters will be out on the street." Isabella and Camila began to scream hysterically. Don Anselmo fell to his knees, pleading, "Have mercy! I'll give you anything." Don Fausto smiled, revealing yellowish teeth. His eyes scanned the sisters, who were crying, and then stopped on Elena, who was standing next to Alejandro in the shadows. The old merchant licked his lips. He had always had an unhealthy obsession with the youngest daughter, the simple virgin, whose purity excited him more than the vulgarity of the other two. "Anything," Don Fausto repeated. "Very well. There is a way to settle the debt. I will forget the 50,000 reales and let you live here if you give me your youngest daughter." "Elena?" asked Don Anselmo incredulously. "Yes, I want her as my wife tonight. I have a lady waiting for me in my carriage." Elena let out a muffled cry, took a step back, and bumped into Alejandro's chest. He held her tightly, feeling her body shake violently. A cold fury, far more dangerous than hot anger, began to rise through Alejandro's veins. Don Anselmo didn't hesitate for a second. He stood up, dusted off his knees, and looked at his youngest daughter. "Elena, come here." "No, father," she cried. "Please, he's not a monster." "It is your duty to save this family," Don Anselmo roared. regaining his arrogance. What good have you done us all these years with your books and your nonsense? Now you will be useful. You will marry Don Fausto and save us from ruin. It's a deal, Don Anselmo declared, shaking the lecherous old man's hand. Don Fausto advanced toward Elena with open arms, like a vulture about to devour a dove. Come here, my little flower. I'll teach you what it means to be a real woman. Elena felt like she was dying. Her world was closing in on her. She was going to be sold like a cow, handed over to a man who repulsed her physically and morally. She looked at Alejandro with eyes full of tears, saying goodbye silently, knowing that he could do nothing. He was just a beggar, a poor man in debt, as powerless as she was. However, when Don Fausto reached out his ring-covered hand to grab Elena's arm, another hand intercepted it, a hand strong and calloused from daily work, but firm as iron. Alejandro stood between the old man and the young woman. His posture had changed. He no longer hunched his back. His chin was high and his gaze was lethal. "Take your filthy hands off her," Alejandro said in a voice that echoed in the courtyard with the authority of thunder. "Who the hell are you?" growled Don Fausto, trying to break free. "Anselmo, tell your peon to step aside or I'll have him whipped." "Step aside, you idiot," shouted Don Anselmo. "You're ruining the deal." Alejandro didn't move. He looked at Elena, ignoring the others. "Elena, listen to me carefully. You don't have to do this. Don't sacrifice yourself for those who despised you a minute ago." "I have no choice, Alejandro. It's me. It's me." "Yes, you do. Look at me, wow," he asked, taking her face in his hands, not caring that the old merchant and her father were shouting. "Choose poverty, choose hunger, if necessary, but don't choose slavery. Come with me. I have nothing to offer you but my tarnished name and the road, but I swear you will be free." "Enough of this charade," Don Anselmo shouted, signaling to two burly servants. "Hold the vagabond and beat him. Elena, get in the carriage right now." The servants advanced with sticks. Don Fausto grabbed Elena's wrist violently, making her scream in pain. That scream broke Alejandro's last barrier of restraint. In one fluid motion, Alejandro disarmed the first servant who tried to hit him, snatching the stick and using it to strike the second servant in the knees with military precision. Then he turned to Don Fausto. With a single push, he sent the old merchant rolling across the dirt floor. Chaos erupted. Isabella and Camilla were screaming. Don Anselmo was running around looking for a shotgun. Alejandro grabbed Elena by the waist, lifted her with impressive strength onto one of the horses that Fausto's men had left loose, and took the reins. He jumped behind her and took the reins. "Hold on tight," he whispered in her ear. "Alejandro, they'll kill us," she screamed, terrified but clinging to his chest. "Let them try," he replied with a defiant laugh. With a kick, the horse reared up and shot toward the open gate, galloping into the darkness of the night and leaving behind the angry cries of a father who had just lost his inn and an old man who had just lost his whim. They rode into the forest under the light of the full moon. Elena wept, believing they were heading for a life of fugitives and utter misery. She did not know that the horse was not heading for a cave, but for the richest duchy in the country. She did not know that the man embracing her from behind was not fleeing the law, but taking her to his true kingdom. But the night was long, and the road to the truth still had obstacles. As the wind blew in their faces, Alejandro knew that the moment of revelation was approaching, and he feared Elena's reaction to his lie more than all the mercenaries Don Fausto might send after them. If you think Elena will forgive Alejandro when she discovers he is a millionaire, write yes in the comments. If you think she will feel betrayed, write no. The next part will reveal the big secret. The horse's frantic gallop devoured the miles under the silvery moonlight, taking them further and further away from the ranch, the flowers, and the cruel fate that awaited Elena. The cold early morning wind cut through her skin, but she hardly felt it. The warmth emanating from Alejandro's body, pressed against her back, was an anchor in the midst of the emotional storm that was shaking her. She clung to his waist desperately, closing her eyes tightly and imagining that they were fleeing to a cave or an abandoned cabin in the mountains, the only possible refuge for a man in debt and a disgraced woman. "We're already far away," she whispered, her voice drowned out by the sound of hooves. "Where will we go, Alejandro? We have no food or shelter, only each other and that little bag with my mother's price." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he spurred the animal on with renewed urgency. Elena noticed something strange. The horse, far from showing signs of exhaustion, seemed to know the way. Its movements were sure, powerful, those of a war horse rather than a stolen farm animal. 2 more hours passed before the sky began to turn a soft grayish orange. The landscape had changed. The bumpy dirt roads had given way to perfectly manicured white gravel paths flanked by centuries-old oak trees that formed a majestic canopy overhead. In the distance stretched endless vineyards glistening with morning dew and wheat fields that looked like seas of liquid gold. Alejandro, we must be careful, Elena warned Boina, tensing up. These lands seem to belong to some powerful nobleman. If they don't find us here, they'll accuse us of being intruders. No one will harm us here, he replied. His voice had changed completely. There was no trace left of the submissive and worried tone of the beggar. He spoke with such propriety and calm that her blood ran cold. The horse slowed to a walk as it approached huge wrought iron gates adorned with a coat of arms and 2 rampant lions holding a sword. Elena held her breath. Behind the gates stood a structure she had only seen in the illustrations of her old books. It was not a house or a mansion. It was a palace. Gray stone towers rose toward the sky. The glass windows reflected the sunrise, and marble fountains spouted crystal-clear water in the front gardens. "Why are we stopping?" she whispered, trembling with panic. "The guards will see us," she said. "I hope so," Alexander said calmly. Before Elena could protest, 2 men in blue and gold livery came out of the guardhouses. They were carrying muskets, but when they saw the rider, instead of aiming, they lowered their weapons and opened the gates with astonishing speed. "His Excellency has returned," shouted one of them, bowing deeply, almost touching the ground with his forehead. "Notify the butler, open the main gates," ordered the other guard, who ran toward the palace. Elena felt the world spinning dizzyingly. Excellency looked at Alejandro for an explanation, but he kept his eyes fixed on the entrance, his face impassive like a king returning from battle. They walked up the driveway under the astonished gaze of gardeners and stable boys who stopped to take off their hats. When they reached the main staircase, a dozen servants were already lined up in perfect formation. An elderly man, dressed in black and looking impeccable, hurried down the stairs. "My lord, we were very worried," said the man, taking the reins of the horse. "We feared that your incognito journey had been marred by mishaps." Alexander dismounted nimbly and then turned to Elena, extending his arms to help her down. "Welcome home, Elena," he said. She let herself down, but her legs buckled when they touched the ground, not from exhaustion, but from the impact of reality. She looked at her gray dress, stained with mud and straw, and then looked at the fine leather shoes worn by Alejandro, who had removed his tattered cloak to reveal that beneath his bastard shirt he carried himself with the bearing of a born aristocrat. "Who are you?" she asked, taking a step back. Her voice was a thread of disbelief and pain. "You're not Alejandro, the poor cousin. You're not Alejandro, the poor cousin. You're him, the Duke of Montalvo, the man my father was expecting. I am Alejandro de Velasco, Duke of Montalvo." "Yes," he admitted, trying to approach her, but she backed away again, bumping into the cold marble of a statue. "You lied," she cried, and the heartbreaking sound of her voice echoed off the palace facade. The servants looked down, uncomfortable. It was all a lie. The hunger, the cold, the debts. "You made me give you my mother's medallion. You made me cry for you and fear for you while you mocked my naivety." "I never mocked you, Elena," Alejandro said intensely, closing the distance and taking her by the shoulders despite her resistance. "Listen to me. I needed to know. I had to be sure of my hair." "Sure of what? That I'm a stupid woman who takes pity on beggars?" "Sure that you weren't like them," he roared, losing his composure for the first time. Alejandro gave a sharp signal and the servants dispersed, leaving them alone at the foot of the staircase. The sun was already shining on their faces. Hers was stained with tears and dust. His was tormented by guilt and love. "5 years ago, I buried my first wife, Sophia," Alejandro began to explain in a hoarse voice. "Everyone said she was the most beautiful woman in the region. I married her, blinded by her beauty, but on our wedding night she confessed that she was repulsed by the touch of my hand and that she only loved the title of Duchess and the gold in my coffers. I lived 3 years in a hell of coldness, seen only as a bag of coins, never as a man. When she died, I swore I would never let anyone into my life again unless they loved me, Alejandro, and not the Duke. Elena listened with her chest heaving. The anger was still there, but it was beginning to mix with understanding. Alejandro reached into his pocket and took out the gold medallion with the small ruby, which sparkled brightly in the sunlight. When you gave me this in the barn, he continued, his eyes moist, you didn't give me gold. You gave me your life. You gave up your only security to save a man you thought was worthless. At that moment, Elena, I knew it was you. You are the only truth I have found in a world of hypocrisy. He took her hand, placed the medallion gently in her palm, and closed her fingers around it. Then he did something that took Elena's breath away. He knelt before her on the gravel, dirtying his fine trousers. Forgive me for deceiving you. Hate me if you want for lying to you, but don't leave, stay. Let me prove to you that the man you fed in the barn is the same man kneeling here. Everything you see, he gestured to encompass the palace, the lands, the horizon I made. It means nothing without you. Elena looked at the powerful man kneeling at her feet. She felt dizzy and overwhelmed. The transition from being an invisible Cinderella to becoming the possible owner of all this was too abrupt. She felt like an imposter. Look at me, Alexander, she said softly. Look at me, Alexander. Really, I'm covered in bruises. I have dirt under my fingernails. I don't know how to be a duchess. They'll eat me alive in your world. Your society will laugh at you for bringing a maid to the palace. Alejandro stood up and cradled her face in his hands. Let them laugh, and when they're done laughing, they'll see me bowing before you. You have more nobility in your little finger than the entire royal court put together. Now come, you are home. He led her inside. The hallway was a cavern of white marble with crystal chandeliers hanging like frozen tears. Elena walked timidly, afraid of dirtying the floor. Rodolfo called the butler, Alejandro. Prepare the blue suite and call the maids. My guest needs a hot bath, clean clothes, and rest. And let it be clear to everyone. Whoever disrespects her insults me. As you wish, Your Excellency, replied the butler without batting an eyelid when he saw Elena. Dear viewers, if you were Elena, would you have forgiven the lie so quickly, or would you have made him suffer a little more? Leave a comment with your opinion on whether she should have forgiven the lie so quickly, or whether she should have made him suffer a little more. Subscribe to see how Elena transforms. The next few hours were a blur of sensations for Elena. She was taken to a room 3 times larger than the house where her father's servants lived. The maids filled a porcelain bathtub with steaming water, scented with lavender and roses. For the first time in her life, someone bathed her, washing away the dirt from the road and, symbolically, the layers of abuse she had suffered. When she emerged from the water, wrapped in a silk robe that caressed her skin like a gentle breeze, she looked at herself in the full-length mirror. The girl staring back at her no longer looked like the gray servant. Her skin glowed and her brown hair, now clean and brushed, fell in shiny waves over her shoulders. However, her eyes were still frightened. Someone knocked on the door. It was Alejandro. He had already washed and changed. Now he wore a dark blue velvet suit that highlighted his imposing figure. He carried a tray with fruit and wine. Better? He asked, standing respectfully in the doorway. It's too much, she confessed, sitting on the edge of the huge 4-poster bed. I feel like I'm going to wake up in the barn at any moment. It's not a dream, Elena. It's justice. They sat down to talk, this time without haste or lies. Alejandro told her about managing the land, his responsibilities, and the loneliness that inhabited those corridors. Elena told him about her fears, about the certainty that her father would come looking for her not out of love, but because he considered her his possession. Don't worry about Don Anselmo, said Alejandro, a dark shadow crossing his gaze. I've already sent a messenger. They'll know you're here, and they'll know who I am. Did you tell them the truth? She asked, alarmed. I told them that the beggar has taken your daughter under his protection. I did not reveal my title in the letter. I want them to come. I want to see their faces when they realize their mistake. Elena felt a chill. Alejandro's revenge was underway, and she was at the center of the board. Meanwhile, 50 kilometers away, at the Las Flores estate, Chaos reigned. Don Fausto had threatened to call the civil guard and accuse the beggar of kidnapping. Don Anselmo, furious and humiliated, read the note that a horseman had left pinned to the gatepost with a knife. Your daughter is safe with me. If you want her back, come and get her in the Eastern Highlands. But come prepared to settle your moral debts, Anselmo. Sincerely, the man who slept in your barn. Damn insolent man, shouted Anselmo, crumpling the paper. He's taken my daughter to the barren lands. He's probably keeping her in a cave. Father, Isabella interjected, her eyes sparkling with malice. If that vagabond has dishonored her, she is no longer of any use to Don Fausto. But we can use this. We'll go to the sheriff, accuse him of kidnapping, have him hanged, and bring Elena back to serve in the house for the rest of her life as punishment. Prepare the carriage, Don Anselmo ordered, and tell Don Fausto to bring his men. We're going to hunt that dog down. Back at the palace, night had fallen again. Elena stepped out onto the balcony of her room. Alejandro was in the garden below, looking up at the moon. She watched him silently. She loved him. Yes, her heart had known it since that night in the barn. But now that love was wrapped in silk and power, and that terrified her more than poverty. Alejandro looked up and saw her. He smiled at her, and for a moment, he was just Alejandro again. Rest, my Elena, he said from below. Tomorrow we will begin to prepare you. In 3 days, I will hold a masquerade ball to announce my engagement. Engagement, she repeated, her heart pounding in her chest. Yes, I am going to marry the woman who saved me, and I am going to present her to society as the jewel that she is. But first, we must teach you to shine so that you can blind those who tried to extinguish you. Elena entered the room and closed the glass doors. She brought her hand to her chest where her mother's medallion rested once more, now clean and shiny. The simple girl was about to enter the lion's den, high society. Her family was on its way, armed with hatred and greed, unaware that they were heading straight into a gilded trap. The war had begun, and the battlefield would be a ballroom lit by 1,000 candles. The Alarcon family's carriage struggled along the country roads, kicking up clouds of ochre dust that clung to the windows like a dirty second skin. Inside the carriage, the atmosphere was as unbreathable as the air outside. Don Anselmo, red with anger and heat, banged his cane on the floor every time a wheel hit a pothole, cursing the audacity of the beggar who had dared to challenge his authority. Beside him, Isabella and Camilla fanned themselves frantically, more concerned about how the journey would affect their complexion than about the fate of their younger sister. He's a scoundrel, Anselmo grumbled for the umpteenth time. A beggar kidnapping an Alarcon. When I find that Alejandro, I'll have him whipped 50 times before handing him over to the judge. And Elena, that ungrateful girl, I'll lock her in the basement until she learns to obey. Father, the road is changing, Camilla observed, peeking through the curtain. There are no more potholes, and look at those trees, they're pruned into geometric shapes. They're pruned into geometric shapes. Without realizing it, the carriage had crossed the borders of the Duchy of Montalvo. The transition was abrupt. They went from the neglect and drought of the neighboring lands to an orchard of prosperity. Vineyards stretched as far as the eye could see, laden with dark, sweet grapes, and the peasants working in the fields were not starving skeletons, but well-fed men and women who greeted the passing vehicle with respect, even though it was as ramshackle as the Alarcons. Where the hell has this madman brought us? Isabella wondered, frowning with envy at the richness of the land. He has surely led us into a trap on the domain of some important lord so that we can be accused of trespassing, she said to herself, frowning with envy at the richness of the land. Meanwhile, in the heart of the palace, Elena was fighting her own battle, not against monsters or bandits, but against her own reflection in the full-length mirror in her suite. Alejandro had summoned the best artists and dressmakers in the capital, who had arrived with trunks full of silks, Brussels lace, and Genoese velvets. Elena stood on a platform while 3 seamstresses adjusted the folds of a midnight blue dress, designed to highlight the paleness of her skin and the depth of her eyes. "Straighten your back, my lady," said the head dressmaker in a kind but firm tone. "Don't hide your neck. A duchess does not look at the ground, she looks at the horizon." Elena obeyed, but she felt like an imposter in disguise. When the seamstresses left her alone for a moment, she sank into an armchair, overwhelmed. The door opened and Alejandro entered. He was not wearing formal attire, but elegant riding clothes with polished leather boots that echoed on the marble. Seeing her dejected, his expression softened. "Do you feel like a bird in a gilded cage?" he asked, approaching her and pouring 2 glasses of crystal clear water. "I feel like a little girl playing dress-up with her mother's clothes," she confessed, accepting the glass. "Alejandro, look at my hands," she said, extending her palms toward him and showing him the small calluses and marks from years of domestic work. "These hands have scrubbed floors and milked cows, silk snags on them. You can't erase my history with an expensive dress." Alejandro set down his glass and took Elena's hands in his, kissing each palm with almost religious devotion. "I don't want to erase your history, Elena. I want to frame it. These marks are medals of honor. They prove that you served, that you have strength. Your sister's hands are soft because they have never lifted anything heavier than a fan. Yours have held the weight of an entire family. That's why you're queen, not the fabric you're wearing." "They're coming," she whispered, trembling. "I can feel them. My father won't stop." "Let them come," said Alejandro with a cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm looking forward to opening the door for them, but remember, Elena, today you are not the despised daughter. Today you are the lady of this house. When they enter, I don't want you to lower your head. If you do, they will win, and you will cease to be a loser." A distant rumble of wheels on gravel interrupted the moment. Alejandro went to the window and pulled back the heavy curtain. The Alarcón carriage had stopped in front of the monumental staircase of the main courtyard. Don Anselmo got out first, his mouth open, staring at the palace towers that rose imposingly toward the blue sky. Then Isabella and Camilla descended, their eyes wide as they took in the statues and the fountains. "Father," Camilla stammered, "that beggar has brought us to the Montalvo Palace. He works here. He's a stable boy." "He must be," exclaimed Anselmo, regaining his arrogance to hide his fear. "He must have hidden here to blackmail us. Guards! Guards!" 2 sentries approached impassively. "Announce Mr. Anselmo Alarcón," ordered the patriarch, trying to sound important. "I have come to retrieve my daughter, who has been kidnapped by one of your servants, a man named Alejandro." The guard did not blink. "His Excellency the Duke awaits you in the Hall of Mirrors. Follow me." "The Duke," Isabella quickly adjusted her neckline, pinching her cheeks. "The Duke knows we are here. Perhaps he has rescued Elena and wants to return the favor, Father. This is my chance." They entered the palace, shuffling their feet on the Persian rugs and gazing covetously at the solid gold chandeliers and antique tapestries. Everything screamed power and untold wealth. Envy gnawed at the sisters, and greed made their father salivate. When they reached the huge double doors of the hall, they opened simultaneously. At the back of the immense room, sitting in an armchair that looked like a throne, was Alejandro, but not the Alejandro they knew. He was clean-shaven, his hair combed back, and he was wearing a black velvet suit embroidered with silver thread. His posture denoted absolute dominance. Next to him, standing with her hand resting on the back of the armchair, was Elena. The midnight blue dress made her look like a heavenly apparition, a goddess of the night. Her hair was held back with pearl combs, and around her neck was her mother's medallion, now polished and shiny. The Alarcón family stopped dead in their tracks. The silence was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. "Welcome to my home," said Alejandro. His voice echoed off the high walls, calm but lethal. "You, Don Anselmo," he said, pointing at him with a trembling finger. "You are the beggar. I am Alejandro de Velasco, Duke of Montalvo, the man you sent to sleep with the pigs 2 nights ago." Isabella let out a gasp and put her hand to her mouth. Camilla looked as if she were about to faint, but not from fear, rather because she was making rapid mental calculations. Their twisted minds processed the information at lightning speed. The man they had humiliated was the richest bachelor in the country. "Oh, Your Excellency!" exclaimed Isabella, stepping forward and bowing awkwardly. "What a terrible misunderstanding. We were only testing your humility. It was a joke, a simple family joke." "A joke," repeated Alejandro, raising an eyebrow. "Leaving me without food was also part of the joke. Trying to sell your sister to a depraved old man was also part of the joke." "We did it for your own good," Anselmo interjected, sweating coldly but trying to maneuver to secure his future. But I see that Elena has been very astute. She has outdone her sisters. The father looked at Elena with a mixture of hatred and forced adulation. My daughter, how beautiful you are. I knew this dress would suit you. I always said you had potential. Come, give your father a hug. All is forgiven. You can come home with us. And the Duke, well, he will surely want to compensate us for the inconvenience. Elena looked at her father. She saw the falseness in his gaze, the same one he had when he offered her to Don Fausto. She felt deeply nauseous, but she remembered Alejandro's words. Don't lower your head. Don't lower your head. No, father, said Elena. Her voice did not tremble. It was soft but firm as steel. There is nothing to forgive, because I have done nothing wrong, and I do not intend to return to that house. My home is where I am respected. Elena's refusal hit Anselmo like a slap in the face. Seeing that the happy family strategy was not working, the sisters changed tactics. Envy overcame prudence. Respect, Camilla sneered, stepping forward with a venomous laugh. Please, Elena, look at yourself. You're wearing silk, but you still smell like a barn. Do you think you can fool the Duke? He's dressed you up like a barrio to amuse himself for a while, but you're not a lady. You don't know how to eat with silver cutlery. You don't know how to dance. You don't know how to converse. You're a maid in a stolen dress. Enough! Alejandro's voice was like a whip crack. He stood up slowly and seemed to double in height. He walked over to Camilla, who took a step back in fear. In this house, the only person who smells bad is the one with a rotten soul. And I assure you, young lady, that my sense of smell is very keen. Alejandro turned to Anselmo. I did not invite you here for false reconciliations. I allowed you to enter to give you some news. In 3 days' time, I will be holding a grand ball. All the nobility of the region is invited, and you will come too. You're inviting us to the ball? Asked Isabella excitedly, fixing her hair. Oh, Duke, you are very generous. I knew your noble heart would forgive our little missteps. I am inviting you so that you can see with your own eyes what you despised, continued Alejandro, ignoring the flirting. I want you to see Elena shine and let everyone know who you really are. You will stay in the West Wing. My servants will watch over you. You will not try to speak to Elena alone. You will not humiliate her. If you bring her to tears one more time, I swear you will lose more than your reputation. We accept, of course, Anselmo said quickly, seeing an opportunity. If they stayed in the palace, they would have 3 days. 3 days to sabotage Elena, 3 days for Isabella or Camilla to seduce the Duke and make him see that Elena was not right for him. 3 days to regain control. Friends, there would be a dramatic pause here. The Alarcon family believes they have a chance. What would you do if you were Elena? Would you refuse them entry or let them stay to witness their own defeat? Write in or out in the comments. That night, dinner was a silent battlefield. 5 different courses were served, each more complicated than the last. Alejandro sat at the head of the table with Elena on his right and the Alarcon family on his left. The sisters watched his every move, waiting for him to make a mistake, waiting for him to use the wrong fork for the fish or drink from the sink bowl. Elena looked at the table full of cutlery. She felt panic rising in her throat. She had never seen so many eating utensils. She glanced sideways at Alejandro. He was not looking at her with pity, but with confidence. With an imperceptible gesture, he picked up the fish fork. Elena imitated him. He took a sip of wine. She imitated him. It was a synchronized dance. Alejandro guided her without words, protecting her with every bite. Frustrated that she couldn't see her fail, Camilla accidentally knocked over a glass of red wine, spilling the liquid directly onto Elena's dress. "Oh, how clumsy," Camilla exclaimed with a fake smile. "I'm sorry, little sister. You're just not used to having nice things. You attract misfortune. Look how you've ruined that expensive fabric." "It's a sign, Duchess. Silk is not made for certain people." The wine spread across the blue skirt like a dark bloodstain. Elena froze, feeling tears sting her eyes. Shame threatened to crush her. It was true, she was clumsy, she didn't belong there. But then Alejandro did something unthinkable. Without taking his eyes off Camila, he took his glass full of wine and deliberately spilled it on his immaculate black velvet suit. The stains spread across his chest and trousers. The table fell completely silent. "You're right," Alejandro said calmly as he wiped himself with a napkin. "Accidents happen. We're both stained, and if the future Duchess has a stain on her dress, fashion dictates that the Duke must have one too. In fact, I think the wine enhances the blue color. Don't you think, Don Anselmo?" Anselmo swallowed hard, unable to respond to such a show of absolute solidarity. Camilla turned red with anger. Her plan for humiliation had turned into a moment of romantic unity that completely excluded them. Alejandro stood up and held out his hand to Elena. "Come on, my dear. I think we've had enough dinner for today. Tomorrow we have dance lessons, and you'll need to rest to be the brightest star in the sky." Elena took his hand and stood up with her head held high, passing her sisters without looking at them. She no longer cared about the stain. She wore it as a badge of his love. As they left the dining room, Isabella whispered to Camilla with venom in her voice, "Enjoy it while you can, little sister. The ball is the day after tomorrow, and there, before all of society, we will make sure that everyone knows the secret you hide. We will not allow a maid to become a duchess." The door closed behind them, leaving the Alarcon family conspiring in the shadows and planning the final blow, which would take place under the lights of the crystal chandeliers. What they didn't know was that they were conspiring against a hurricane and that the ball would be the scene of their own destruction. The stage was set, the invitations had been sent out, and Elena's transformation was just beginning. But the secret the sisters were talking about was something even Alejandro didn't know about. A ghost from the past that could jeopardize everything they had built. What secret do you think the sisters want to reveal? Will it be a fabricated lie or something real from Elena's past? Subscribe so you don't miss the grand ball in the next installment. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the library in Montalvo Palace, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny golden stars. However, the peaceful atmosphere was deceptive. With less than 24 hours to go before the grand engagement ball, the tension in the air was so thick you could almost taste it, metallic and electrifying. In the center of the room, cleared of furniture for the occasion, Alejandro held Elena by the waist. There was no music, except for the steady rhythm of their breathing and the soft rubbing of leather soles on the waxed parquet floor. "1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, Alejandro murmured, guiding her with firm but delicate pressure on her lower back. "Don't look at your feet, Elena. Look at me. If you look at the floor, you'll fall. If you look at me, you'll fly." Lena looked up and met the Duke's dark eyes. She felt her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. "I'm afraid of stepping on you," she confessed, her cheeks flushed. "My feet are used to walking on earth and stones, not gliding across polished wood." "Your feet will go where your heart tells them to," he replied, stopping and pulling her closer, breaking the socially acceptable distance. "Dancing isn't a series of mechanical steps, Elena. It's a conversation without words. I ask you, you respond. I protect you. You trust me. Do you trust me?" "With my life," she whispered without hesitation. "Then forget society. Forget your father and your sisters. On this dance floor, only you and I exist. The rest are ghosts." Alejandro began to hum a soft melody, an old lullaby, and turned again. This time, Elena let herself go, closed her eyes, and allowed herself to be held by his strength. Suddenly, she was no longer the clumsy maid, but a feather floating in the wind, weightless and elegant. When the imaginary music ended, they stood face to face, their lips mere inches apart. "You're ready," he said in a hoarse voice. "Tomorrow when we enter the ballroom, everyone will see what I see. The only woman capable of carrying the duchy on her shoulders." Meanwhile, in the west wing of the palace, the atmosphere was very different. The room assigned to the Alarcon sisters looked like a snake pit, dresses scattered everywhere, fake jewelry on the dressing table, and a rancid smell of cheap perfume permeating the air. Isabella paced nervously, biting her nails, while Camilla, sitting on the bed, held an object wrapped in a dirty lace handkerchief. "Are you sure it will work?" asked Isabella, stopping in front of the mirror to rehearse an innocent expression. "The Duke is blinded by her. If we fail, he'll set the dogs on us." We won't fail, Camilla assured her with a cold smile. A man's lust can forgive poverty and even clumsiness. But the nobility never forgives theft or tainted blood. Camilla unwrapped the object. It was an antique gold and sapphire brooch that had belonged to her late mother, an object that Don Anselmo believed had been lost years ago. Listen to the plan, Camilla whispered, lowering her voice even though they were alone. Tonight, while everyone is asleep, I will bribe one of the new maids, that timid girl from the laundry room. I will have her hide it among Elena's things. Tomorrow, in the middle of the ball, we'll discover that a priceless family jewel is missing. We'll demand that the rooms be searched, and when they find it in Elena's chest, Isabella's eyes sparkled with malice. We'll say she's a kleptomaniac who stole from her own mother on her deathbed. Exactly. But that's not all, Camilla added, raising a finger. The final blow will be the secret. We'll tell the Duke in front of all his stuffy friends the truth about Elena's origins. Mom always suspected that she wasn't Dad's daughter, but the gypsy who worked in the stables. Bastardy is a sin that not even all the Duke's gold can wash away. Society will reject her, and Alejandro, for his own honor, will have to disown her. The sisters laughed with a high-pitched, discordant sound that contrasted with the beauty of the palace they planned to desecrate. Dear viewers, the trap is cruel and twofold, an accusation of theft and a lie about her blood. Do you think Alejandro will believe in Elena's innocence, or will the doubt sown by society be stronger? Leave your opinion in the comments and get ready, because the night of the ball has arrived. The next day passed in a blur of frantic preparations. The palace was transformed into a fairy tale setting. Hundreds of beeswax candles were placed in the huge crystal chandeliers in the Hall of Mirrors. Fresh flowers brought from the royal greenhouses adorned every column and railing, filling the air with the sweet scent of gardenias and lilies. As night fell, the carriages began to arrive. The region's elite stepped out of their vehicles, dressed in their finest attire. Countesses wearing diamond tiaras, knights with military medals, and young debutantes who looked with curiosity and envy toward the illuminated windows, eager to see the mysterious woman who had captivated the Ice Duke. In her suite, Elena stood in front of the mirror, holding her breath. The maids had finished their work and left, leaving her alone with her reflection. The dress Alexander had chosen for her was neither blue nor pink. It was pale gold, almost champagne-colored, and made of silk so fine it looked as if it had been woven from moonbeams. The bodice, fitted and modest, was embroidered with thousands of tiny pearls and crystals that caught the light with every movement. The skirt fell in a soft cascade, without the exaggerated frames worn by her sisters, allowing her to move freely. But the most impressive thing was not the dress, but her. Her brown hair was gathered in an intricate hairstyle adorned with white and gold natural flowers. Her skin, nourished by days of rest and good food, glowed. Round her neck she wore no ostentatious diamonds, but her mother's simple medallion, polished to shine like a miniature sun. The door opened and Alejandro entered. He stopped dead in his tracks, and for a moment, the powerful Duke was speechless. He was dressed in a black and gold military dress uniform, with a red sash across his chest, and wore a ceremonial sword at his belt. Elena approached him slowly, as if afraid he might vanish. If angels descended to earth, they would envy you tonight. I'm afraid, Alejandro, she admitted, trembling slightly. I hear the carriages. I hear the voices. They're like wolves waiting for their prey. You are not the prey, my love. You are the queen of the pack. Let them flee while I hold your hand. No one will be able to touch you. He offered her his strong, steady arm. Ready to meet your kingdom. Elena took a deep breath, touched her mother's locket for strength, and nodded. Ready? They descended the grand marble staircase together. The murmur in the main hall was deafening, but the moment the butler tapped his cane on the floor and announced, His Excellency the Duke of Montalvo and his fiancée, Miss Elena Alarcón, a silence as heavy as a blanket fell. Hundreds of eyes were fixed on them. Elena felt the physical weight of their gazes. Curiosity, judgment, disdain, amazement. She squeezed Alejandro's arm, and he covered her hand with his, giving her warmth. They descended step by step with the majesty of royalty. Elena did not stumble. She kept her head high, remembering her lessons. Look at me, not the floor. When they reached the bottom of the stairs, the crowd parted to let them through. Alejandro guided her to the center of the dance floor. The orchestra, located on the upper balcony, began to play the first chords of a waltz. Just us, he whispered in her ear. Ghosts. They began to dance, and it was magical. Elena moved with an innate grace that left even the fiercest critics speechless. Her simplicity, amid so much artifice and ostentation, was hypnotic. She didn't need huge jewels or provocative necklines. Her light came from within. From a corner, the Alarcon family watched them with clenched teeth. Don Anselmo drank glass after glass of wine, torn between the pride he felt at seeing his daughter so tall and the resentment of knowing that she no longer belonged to him. Isabella and Camilla, in their garishly colored dresses, which looked vulgar compared to Elena's elegance, were consumed by their own venom. Look how they're staring at her, whispered Isabella, squeezing her fan until it almost broke. Do they think she's a saint? Wait, said Camilla, her eyes fixed on the pendulum clock. It's almost time. The maid must have already placed the brooch in the handbag she left in the private cloakroom. The music ended, and the hall erupted in applause, some genuine and some obligatory. Alejandro kissed Elena's hand in front of everyone, in a gesture of public adoration. Ladies and gentlemen, Alejandro announced in a powerful voice, thank you for joining us. Tonight I am not only celebrating a ball, but also the discovery of a treasure. I toast my future wife, Elena, the woman who taught me that true wealth is not in gold, but in the heart. The guests raised their glasses. Elena smiled, feeling truly happy and secure for the first time. But happiness is as fragile as glass. Wait a minute. Camilla's shrill voice cut through the air, stopping the toasts. Your Excellency, stop everything. There has been a crime. A murmur of confusion rippled through the room. Alejandro frowned and instinctively reached for the hilt of his sword. What do you mean, Miss Alarcon? He asked coldly. Camilla stepped forward to the center of the dance floor, followed by Isabella and Don Anselmo, who looked confused but willing to play along. Duke, I'm sorry to ruin your party, Camilla said with feigned regret, but we've just realized that a family jewel of immense value has disappeared. Our late mother's sapphire brooch. We brought it to give to Elena as a peace offering, but it's gone from our jewelry box. And what does that have to do with my fiancé? Asked Alejandro, standing in front of Elena like a human shield. Well, Isabella interjected, we saw Elena snooping around our things before the dance, and we all know that poverty can lead people to acquire unpleasant habits, such as kleptomania. That's a lie, Elena exclaimed, stepping forward indignantly. I would never touch anything of yours. Then you won't mind if we search your handbag, will you, little sister? Camilla challenged with a triumphant smile. It's in the cloakroom. If you have nothing to hide, let us look. The entire society held its breath, a scandal of theft in the midst of a ducal engagement. Fans fluttered frantically. Alejandro looked at Elena. She returned his gaze with clear, transparent eyes. I have nothing to fear, she said with dignity. Bring my bag. A servant brought the small silk bag Elena had used. Camilla snatched it from her hands and with a theatrical gesture, emptied it onto a nearby side table. A handkerchief, a bottle of smelling salts, and the heavy gold and sapphire brooch fell out, hitting the wood with a dull thud that echoed like a gunshot. The gasp from the crowd was unanimous. Thief, Isabella shouted, pointing her finger at her. I knew it. You were always envious. You stole from your own family on the night of your triumph. Elena stared at the brooch, paralyzed with horror. No, I don't know how that got there, she stammered, feeling the ground open up beneath her feet. She looked at Alejandro desperately. Alejandro, I swear, she said. But Camilla wasn't finished. And she's not just a thief, Duke, she shouted, taking advantage of the moment of weakness to drop the second bombshell. She's an imposter. You should know who you're marrying. That woman is not a legitimate Alarcon. She is the bastard daughter of a gypsy stable boy with whom my mother had an affair. She has a dirty, treacherous blood in her veins. She is a bastard and a thief. The silence that followed was absolute and terrifying. The accusation of bastardy meant certain social death. Elena felt her strength leaving her. Tears clouded her vision. Everything had collapsed in a second. The trap was perfect. Alejandro stood motionless, staring at the brooch and then at the sisters, who were panting with excitement at their victory. His face was an unreadable stone mask. Don Anselmo, seeing an opportunity to distance himself from his fallen daughter, shouted, "Disgrace! If that woman is not my daughter, I disown her. Duke, forgive this deception. We did not know we were harboring a criminal." Elena, alone in the barkle of accusers, lowered her head, expecting rejection, expecting Alejandro to let go of her hand and expel her from his paradise. But Alejandro not only did not let go, he squeezed so hard that he almost hurt her. He took a step forward, slowly with the terrible calm of a predator before the attack. He approached the table, took the sapphire brooch, and held it up for all to see. Then he looked at Camilla with eyes that promised hell. "Interesting," Alejandro said in a soft voice that chilled the blood of those present. "Very interesting, because there is one small detail you have forgotten in your perfect story, Miss Alarcon. The Duke has noticed something, a mistake in the sister's plan. What could it be? A detail about the brooch, a witness. Alejandro's revenge is about to be unleashed, and it will be relentless. Don't miss the denouement, when the truth will come to light and the villains will get their just desserts." The Great Hall of Mirrors in the Montalvo Palace had been turned into a makeshift courtroom. The air, once filled with music and laughter, now hung heavy like molten lead. All eyes were focused on a single point. There, Alejandro held the sapphire brooch under the light of the crystal chandeliers. Camilla and Isabella wore triumphant smiles, convinced that their poison had taken effect. Don Anselmo, for his part, was already calculating how to publicly distance himself from his daughter, a thief and a bastard, to save his own skin. Elena, her face pale but her chin held high, felt the world crumbling in slow motion. However, Alejandro's hand continued to squeeze hers, like an unbreakable anchor in the midst of the storm. Alejandro broke the silence with a laugh. It was not a laugh of joy or mockery, but a dry, dark, and dangerous sound that made several guests instinctively recoil. They said they had brought this jewel from the family, safe to give to Elena as a peace offering. "Is that right?" asked the Duke, turning the brooch between his fingers with terrifying calm. "That's right, Your Excellency," replied Camilla in a sickly sweet tone. "It was Mom's favorite jewel. We wanted Elena to have it. Well, of dubious origin." "Curious," Alexander murmured. "It's very curious because, you see, there are two problems with your story. The first is that sapphires don't lose their color over time, but painted glass does." With a sudden movement, Alexander squeezed the jewel and, to everyone's amazement, ripped out one of the precious stones with his fingernail, revealing a base of rusted brass. He threw the fake brooch at Camilla's feet. The hollow metallic sound echoed in the deathly silence. "It's a cheap fake," thundered Alejandro, his voice filling every corner of the room. "A theatrical trinket." "We didn't know," stammered Isabella, backing away. "Elena must have switched it." "Silence," ordered the Duke. "I said there were two problems. The second is the more serious one. You were unable to bring the original brooch from the family home because I have it." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the crowd. Alejandro signaled to his butler, Rodolfo, who approached with a small black velvet box. He opened it, and on the white silk lay the real brooch. The genuine sapphire sparkled with a deep, unmistakable blue fire, putting the imitation lying on the floor to shame. Alejandro fixed his gaze on Don Anselmo, who seemed to have shrunk 3 inches inside his suit. 3 months ago, a moneylender from the capital contacted me and offered me an exquisite piece that a ruined country gentleman had pawned to pay gambling debts and buy new dresses for his eldest daughters. I bought the jewel to recover it, as I knew it belonged to the Alarcon family, and I planned to return it to them one day. The Duke advanced toward the sisters, who were visibly trembling. "You knew your father had sold the jewel. You used a copy to frame your own sister. You planned it coldly and maliciously, abusing my hospitality and desecrating my home." Camilla tried to speak, but the words would not come out. The society that minutes before had looked at Elena with suspicion now looked at them with utter contempt. Fans snapped shut, sealing their social judgment. On the accusation of bastardy, Alejandro continued, softening his voice but maintaining his intensity. They said Elena has dirty blood. He turned to Elena, took her hands, looked at her with devotion, and a sigh escaped from the mouths of the ladies present. I don't care if her father was a king or a beggar. I don't care if she was born in a palace or a stable. Nobility is not transmitted through blood. It is demonstrated through actions. You, with your surnames and your silks, have proven yourselves to be vulgar and cruel. Elena, with her hard-working hands and pure heart, has proven herself to be the only true aristocrat in this room. She fed me when I pretended to have nothing. She offered me her only treasure to save me. She embodies honor. Alejandro turned to the defiant crowd. If anyone here has a problem with the origins of my future wife, the doors are open. You can leave now and never return. No one moved. On the contrary, the elderly Count of Villaflor began to applaud slowly. First a duke did so, then a general. Within seconds, the entire hall erupted in thunderous applause, not out of obligation but out of genuine respect for the defense of true love. Elena was crying, but this time they were tears of liberation. The shame had evaporated, replaced by immense pride. Now, said Alejandro, raising his hand to ask for silence, let's talk about justice. The Duke walked over to stand in front of Don Anselmo. The patriarch was sweating profusely and wringing his handkerchief. Your Excellency, these are women's matters. I didn't know, the cowardly father tried to excuse himself. Be quiet, Alejandro cut him off. I have bought all your debts, Anselmo. Every promissory note, every mortgage, the estate, the flowers, everything is mine. Everything you own, from your carriages to the clothes you wear, is technically mine. Isabella let out a scream of horror. Are you going to throw us out on the street? Camilla asked, her eyes wide. We're family. Elena, say something. All eyes turned to Elena. She had absolute power at that moment. She could destroy them with a single word. She could send them to jail for theft and defamation. Elena wiped her tears, stepped forward and said, she looked at her father and her sisters, the people who had made her life miserable for years. She saw their fear, their smallness. I won't throw you out on the street, Elena said firmly. I won't throw you out on the street. That would be cruel, and I'm not like you. There was a sigh of relief from the Alarcon family, but Elena wasn't finished. You will live on the Las Flores estate, but not in the main house. That house will become a school for the children of the farm workers. You will live in the old foreman's house, the little cabin by the river. That thing, exclaimed Isabella. It barely has 2 rooms. It's damp. It's a roof, replied Elena relentlessly. And you will have to work. There will be no servants. If you want to eat, you will have to cultivate the land. If you want clean clothes, you will have to wash them in the river, just like I did. You'll learn what hard work is. Maybe with time and sweat, you'll cleanse the dirt from your souls. Alejandro smiled, admiring his fiancée's poetic justice. You've heard the future Duchess, he declared. My guards will escort you out of my sight right now. I don't want your presence to sour this evening any further. 4 guards approached in full view of high society and escorted Don Anselmo and his daughters to the exit. The sisters cried and stamped their feet, dragging their bright dresses, while their father walked hunched over, defeated by his own greed. No one said goodbye to them. Their fall was total and absolute. Dear friends, before the most romantic final moment, I want you to write in the comments, did you think the punishment was fair? Should Elena have been harsher, or was she too lenient? Your opinion matters. When the doors closed behind the villains, the air in the room became light and sweet again. Alejandro turned to Elena. You have shown mercy that they did not deserve, my love. You are extraordinary. I just want them to learn, Alejandro. I don't want my heart to be filled with hatred. I want to fill it only with you. Alejandro took the genuine sapphire brooch, but instead of putting it on, he closed it in his fist and set it aside. Then he reached into his pocket and took out something much simpler. A simple gold wedding band, no diamonds, no ostentation. I pretended to be poor to find you, he said, kneeling before her for the 2nd time, but now before the whole world. And in my feigned poverty, I found the greatest wealth in the universe. Elena, Will you marry this man with his virtues and his flaws, to walk together, not in front or behind, but side by side for the rest of our lives? Elena smiled radiantly like the sun after the storm. I accept the man from the barn. I accept the Duke. I accept you, Alejandro, my only love. He slipped the ring onto her finger, stood up, and kissed her. It was a deep and passionate kiss that sealed an eternal promise. Applause erupted again. The musicians began to play a triumphant waltz, and hundreds of white rose petals fell from the upper balconies, raining down on the lovers like a blessing. Epilogue. 5 years later. The afternoon sun bathed the gardens of the estate, now transformed and full of life. Where once there had been silence and decay, now the laughter of children could be heard coming from the school set up in the main mansion. In the small foreman's cabin by the river, 3 figures worked the land. Isabella and Camilla, prematurely aged by the sun and hard work, argued as they pulled weeds from a potato patch. Their hands, once soft, were now calloused and cracked. Don Anselmo, sitting on a wooden bench, stared into space, remembering times past that would never return and living off the charity of the daughter he had despised. They had learned their lesson the hard way. Vanity cannot be eaten. In the distance, an open carriage traveled along the gravel roads. Inside were the Duke and Duchess of Montalvo. Elena carried a dark-haired boy in her arms, while a 3-year-old girl laughed as she sat on Alejandro's lap. Elena wore no large jewelry, only her medallion and her simple wedding ring. She looked more beautiful than ever, with the serenity of someone who is in control of her own destiny. "Do you regret it?" asked Alejandro, kissing her neck as they looked out over their prosperous lands. "What?" she asked, resting her head on his shoulder. "Feeding that beggar on a stormy night." Elena laughed, and her laughter was pure music. "That beggar gave me a kingdom, Alejandro, but more importantly, he gave me a voice and taught me that true magic is not in fairy tales, but in the kindness of strangers." The carriage continued on its way toward the golden horizon, leaving behind the bitterness of the past and moving toward a future built on truth and unconditional love. The simplest had won the most important game of all, that of happiness. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If you like the ending, don't forget to click like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell so you don't miss our next novel. Until the next story.